Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to this session. It's alignment and education between the chair and the program director. And my name is Deitte. I'll be moderating this session. And we have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you. As an overview for the session, it's broken up into three 25-minute segments, starting with social media and then going on to strategic planning and then financial management. We're saving some time at the end. The question and answers, we'll do that at the end, the Q&A. I just ask that you silence your phones, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So our first two speakers will be Omary and Ed Donnelly from Vanderbilt University, and they're going to be speaking on social media in the department and residency program.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been a fantastic meeting. We are in this grand ballroom, and it certainly is grand in terms of size. I would like everyone in the back to know that they are as included as anyone up here. So I'm going to start with this picture and ask, what does this mean? How many people remember this? Dr. Mullins, what is this? ER, what was ER? Television show, just any television show? There may, I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who grew up with this the way certainly that I did. This was part of must-see TV. And it was one of those shows that battled for the top of the TV heap. And it battled with Seinfeld. And it went back and forth. And for about 5 years, this was the #1 or #2 show in all of television. It won umpteen Emmys, I think nominated for over 100. I mean, this is one of the most renowned TV shows of the last several decades. And so you might ask, why would I be starting with a show with a picture of ER? So this guy, Noah Wyle. Noah was one of the key characters. Noah, can anyone name a movie that Noah has done? Can anyone name one? Okay, we can maybe get one, maybe somebody, sort of a tepid hand raising. Now, how about this guy, George Clooney? So, ER is the peak, the #1 show, 1998, 1999, and what does Clooney do? He could sit and be like Noah Wyle. He could be comfortable on the top-rated TV show. And what does George Clooney do? He gives it all up to take a risk. To become a movie star. So, this is a question for us in radiology. Who do we want to be? Do we want to be Noah Wyle? Comfortable in what we do, we live good lives, we all know what we do, it's all, or do we want to be George Clooney? It's a legitimate question. And it's a question that I think we want to ask ourselves all the time. And I think the answer is that we want to have one step in our current business, the business of imaging and all that we do around imaging. And if we're going to be as impactful as someone like George Clooney, we got to have one foot in another business. And that's the business of our future. So what does that look like? What does our business of the future look like? And so I think one way to look at it is, instead of of us being focused on imaging. Our core business, our old business is imaging. We're not going to lose that. But what if we think of ourselves as masters of technology? That might be a Clooney move. Another one is to consider ourselves as the hub, the connectors, the transport systems. To consider ourselves as the highway rather than the cars. And I think a third opportunity for us is to be perceived as the innovators of tomorrow, the specialty that creates the future of medicine, of healthcare, and of health. If you buy any of those futures, the strength comes from connecting. It all comes from being part and embracing a larger ecosystem. If that is in our future, how can we in radiology not embrace social media? So social media is not what did I have for lunch, although it can be. Okay, sometimes we have a great lunch and we want people to know about it. But it is way, way more impactful. Social media is a tool that can position ourselves, masters of tech, the architects of connectivity, and the innovators of tomorrow. Most medical centers are not they quite haven't cracked this nut, and certainly for physicians and other healthcare providers, how do we use social media to advance the missions that we have in our medical centers is a question that remains to be totally answered. And so what Ed Donnelly and I are going to do today with you is try and help show you how and why. And Ed is our program director in radiology, Vanderbilt. And to the best of my knowledge, Ed has more Twitter followers than any other radiologist. The last I checked, over 32,000 people follow. So while technically we are not as big as ER, we're not as big as TV, Ed is a broadcaster, and it's something really we can learn a lot from Ed. So, Ed?
All right, thanks a lot, Reed. What I want to do today is get into a little bit more sort of the nitty-gritty of, how do we do this? How does our department embrace social media? And really specifically, what do we do with the residents? So I started this, it was part of a department mission, but I took it on as, well, how can we do this with the residents to both their advantage and to the advantage of our department? And really, I think, kind of along the lines of what Reed said, to the advantage of, radiology as a whole. I don't know how many of you also have 4 kids in high school. But if you do, you probably see a lot of these, get a lot of emails like this that I got from the principal of their high school. This is just yet another one of these things for the parents about the dangers of being online, the dangers of social media. And I think a lot of us start out in that place because social media is very powerful. And just like anything else that's powerful, if used incorrectly, or if it gets into the wrong hands, or with teenagers who might not have the foresight to use it correctly, it can really cause a lot of harm. And so there are a lot of dangers because of the power of social media. But you can also use that power to your advantage. And that's really the message we try to get across with our residents, and we try to teach them, well, how can you use this to your advantage? And one of the advantages to the residents of getting involved with social media, and we have departmental programs in a lot of different platforms, but really Twitter is the one that we use the most. So we have Instagram and we have Facebook and we use Periscope. It's different things like that, but really Twitter is where we focus a lot of our efforts and focus a lot of this with the residents. So just like our teenagers are warned about the footprint that you're going to leave with social media if you don't use it correctly, I tell the residents, if you do use it correctly, you can leave that footprint to brand yourself the way you want the world to see you. So it's not just self-promotion, it's really a form of self-branding. So this is Elevate, one of our second-year residents. You know, when he decided to define himself in the 140 characters he gets, sorry, this is crazy. In the 140 characters he gets to describe his role, he decided that he wanted to describe himself, his words, evaluating the intersection between radiology and health policy. So, first of all, it's a very important exercise for him to sit down and think about, who am I? You know, what do I want the world to think of me, and what's important to me? And that's what's important to him. I don't put that on that's not what's important to me. I'm not a health policy kind of person, but that's what he's interested in. That's his kind of career. So it gives him an opportunity to think about what he wants to be, and also to go ahead and brand himself like that. And then when he's out there doing things, so here he is at RSNA, he's got a health policy poster, and he's tweeting about himself. So he just reinforces that self-brand that he's made for himself, and people are going to start to see him and connect with him. It's a neat benefit for the residents. We also see social media as a nice way for the residents to connect with people either in radiology or outside of radiology, and it's a really nice way to share ideas. Karthik is another one of our residents, and this was, he wrote a letter to the editor. He's interested in healthcare in general, not just as it relates to radiology, but access to healthcare. He wrote this editorial in our local paper about public transportation and how it affects healthcare. Just something that was important to him, not really related to radiology. And then that got picked up, it got tweeted, people were spreading about it, talking about it. One of the local TV stations contacted him, said, hey, we saw this tweet about this art, and so it just kind of builds, and it's a great way for them to connect with other communities, to get their ideas out there, and to learn about other people's ideas. So it's a nice benefit to them that way. And another, the third real benefit that we see to the residents themselves is it's a great way for them to learn about content areas outside of radiology that might be important to them or that intersect with radiology. So you're a very techie kind of specialty, so there's a lot of people interested in things like new technology, artificial intelligence, right? We keep hearing about that in radiology and all this 3D printing images and all this kind of stuff. And here's Megan, one of our second years, tweeting about maybe an early form of AI radiology, but this is a real Scientific American article. But it's a great way for them to interact with people who have a different skill set, who can teach them about other things that are going on that might intersect with radiology, and can teach them more about that. And each individual resident has a different area that might be important to them. So Elevate might be interacting with people about healthcare policy, while Megan's interacting with people who are interested in pigeon research or whatever else. It's a fascinating study, by the way. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit then about how do we do this? How do we get them involved in these things? What do we do with the residents? And it all starts at a session like this. So every year, we get all the first-year residents. I meet with the first-year residents once a week, but we spend one of those sessions just focused on, we're going to set up a Twitter account. And you need to know how to set up a Twitter account, and we're going to give you best practices. So we bring in a social media expert. We're fortunate that we have one who chairs our department. He comes in and he talks to the residents, teaches them some of the stuff I just said about the advantages of social media, some concerns about, if you use it the wrong way, but then also how can you use it professionally to further your professional career. And that's really what we focus on. So we just have a session, we give them an assignment, we say, here's what you need. You need to show up with and we give them a list of things they need. They need a really nice headshot. They need to have thought about a description of what they want to do, background picture. And we go through bit by bit how you set up your account and what are the best practices. And we actually bring in people who are not physicians, but are experts in social media, who come in and work with them and talk to them about, okay, well, here's what you need for your headshot. We make sure everybody has a nice professional looking headshot, not, you know, I'm down at the beach and I took a picture. That's great, but you know, this is for your professional development and your professional interactions. You know, what should you have? How do you do your description? I've got in there as the B, the label B there is the description. How do you describe yourself? So when people see you and click on you, what are they going to read? What's important to you? And because you're limited to that 140 characters in that description, it really makes you think about, you know, what you want people to learn about you, and then brand yourself in terms of where you live, your locality. So we live in Nashville, and what's a good thing to have in that big background section there. We typically advise our residents it's good to have a geographically oriented kind of big picture, although it's interesting as they get involved in social media themselves, they tend to learn from other people that they're interacting with and might do things differently than how we initially set them up. But they all come out of there with their own account. And so that's step one, to get them set up. Step two is we really encourage them. So as they use social media, as they engage with other people, we encourage them. So here we have our chairman here who just spoke to you, commented. Kevin is one of our first-year residents, and he made a tweet, and then, you know, Reed commented on his tweet. Some of these are just natural interactions, but seeing the faculty utilize social media helps the residents understand its value, and so it's very synergistic. So our faculty and seeing the residents use it also learn more and more about it. So really encouraging them, and then finally, the thing that has been a lot of fun is we also have a contest. And for each first-year class, when they start out, we start a little contest, and we come up with a scoreboard, and it's sort of arbitrary how we score things, but we score how often you tweet, how many people follow you, how many people you follow, just sort of as you use social media, and it comes up with a little score. And then we have a running scoreboard. You can go, and it queries Twitter constantly. They can go online at any time, and they can see this scoreboard. I blew up part of it just so you could see, but they see who in their class has been tweeting, what they've been tweeting about, has their most recent tweet, and where they are in the scoreboard. So it's a gamification. We make it a game. It's a lot of fun for them. The winner gets a $100 gift certificate, which has been a lot of fun for them. And so this has been successful. The residents like it. I'm going to just end here with a couple of our residents, and we can, hopefully this video will start on its own. Can you hit play on there? Just so you can hear in their words what they think about social media and how it's been for them.
The advantages to Twitter are that it's easy to use, easy to sign up for an account, and a lot of information is easily available at your fingertips. As a resident, I've seen a huge number of benefits. I use Twitter to keep in contact with new colleagues, friends, other residents that I've just met. I use it to find information on residency, learning, lectures, to find out about jobs as well. It's a good way to stay up to date on current information.
You know, social media represents a platform, you know, with over 1 billion users worldwide. This includes on platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Doximity, LinkedIn, and this is an enormous potential for faculty and residents to connect with a billion patients, a billion colleagues, a billion users, to form collaborations, to make themselves freely available to communicate, and to hopefully lead to exciting future directions in research.
And you can see this is a generation that really can connect with this technology. They understand this technology. Some of them are following this meeting right now on social media. People are tweeting about the AUR and what's going on. And so it's really, I think it is the future of academic medicine, and if we want to embrace that future that Reed was talking about, this is one of the pathways that's going to help us get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Carolyn Meltzer and Mark Mullins, who will be talking about strategic planning.
I didn't think I would meet someone who had twice as many Twitter followers than Rich Duzak. So this is very impressive.
It's under yours? Okay. Just a minute. It's under this one.
Under Dr. Mullins. Great. So we were going to talk a little bit about strategic planning. So one of the things that I voiced when I went to Emory was that I wanted to get more experience with strategic planning. And boy, have I ever. We have done a lot of it and really spent a lot of time on it. So I'm going to kind of give you a big picture view of how we look at it. Is there a clicker?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Great. So we're going to talk about, we really embedded our strategic planning processes in our goals for the department overall and the culture that we wanted. Just my disclosures, which have been shown other times here. So starting with the questions, I think it's incredibly important to start with where you want to go. What is the vision? And making sure there's an aligned collective vision for where you want the department, the task force, the institution, whatever it is you're doing the strategic plan around. If there isn't a lot of time spent on that, it's very hard to do the other pieces. And then asking the questions, and I think Jim Rawson at this meeting talked about sort of delving into the whys, and so if this is where we want to go, then how would we get there? What are the possibilities? What would we need to do differently with our resources? We don't have unlimited resources. How do we best invest them? And what structure do we need to get there? Dr. Omary's talking about, where do we want to go as a field? Those are going to be some hard questions, and we're asking them at this meeting and among other radiology meetings. If we are here and we want to be here, we have to have that collective vision and then decide what we do to get there, how we need to get there. It's also really important to look at the prior strategic plan. What worked, what didn't work, what did we think we wanted to invest in, which we then re-examined and abandoned because times change. And this is a particularly challenging time to do strategic planning because things seem to change every 5 minutes. So it has to be an adaptable plan as well. I had a very interesting time when I brought up doing a strategic plan in the department when I first got there. The faculty said, oh, we've done that before, and it was a waste of time. Nothing came of it, and it was just a lot of meetings. So the culture had to be rethought. If this is something we're going to do and ask people to invest time in, then it's got to guide our behavior, it's got to guide what we do, we've got to keep revisiting it, it's got to be a living, breathing way of life and way of proceeding with our business rather than a document that's put on the shelf. And doing appreciative learning about what worked well in that plan. And there's also, spend more time on that, if there's the collective will to make changes. Sometimes you need to say something's on fire and show that before there's a will to change something. So we tend to get complacent the way we're doing things. We know we add value, we don't have to prove it to anyone, and we can get complacent about where we are today. So back to the vision, and I sort of think of this in a timeline. So your vision for where you want to be is not tomorrow. So today I'm here, tomorrow I want to get there. The vision's got to be, where are we 5, 10 years from now? Some of that's really challenging when there's very tenuous times. And scenario planning can complement strategic planning in that way if there's certain highly disruptive potential events. But having that vision is really important. What do we want to be? What do we want to be known as? and then tightening those boundary conditions around the mission. Because if you have some of these broad discussions, they're really a lot of fun, but then folks say, well, and then we could do this, and then we could do this. You always have to come back. Is that our core business? Is that our core reason for being here? And that's where your mission should come in. And getting to strategic goals. Sometimes people want to put in everything. But you didn't mention our residency and our strategic goals. Does that mean our residency isn't important? No, maybe that our residency is doing well and that we need to focus on some other things that we need to build on to be strategically positioned. So it's not a list of what's important to the department, it's a list of things you want to really invest time and sweat on. So it has to be limited. And most strategic plans fail at the implementation phase. So everybody goes, oh, that's our goals, and that's great, and now we're done. But the hard work is really building it into the finances, deciding what you may not do, because you're going to invest in these goals, and really getting it into operational plans. So it can't be in a vacuum from your operations. Tools that can be really helpful in assessing the environment. How many have done a SWOT analysis before? Okay, a lot of folks, but a lot of folks not. So surveying the environment, and I'll get to the meaning of the SWOT, but also sort of talking to other stakeholders, so it can't just be leaders in the department. How are we seen elsewhere? How do our patients see us? How do our referring clinicians see us? How do other stakeholders, how do our students and trainees see us, and our graduates? So thinking about all the stakeholders, sometimes people get consultants, and that can have a use, but you don't want to outsource to a consultant. It has to be an internally driven process. Consultants are helpful when they facilitate, but not when they can't give you a plan. So SWOT analysis, I find this particularly helpful. So it's a very simple process where you think of, what are you good at? What are your strengths? And when I came into this process, our first strategic plan, the faculty said, well, we've done this before, and you know, there's all these challenges we have, we don't like this, and we don't like that. And so I said, well, let's talk about our strengths to start. And then they were like, oh, well, we have great people, and we have great resources, and we have all these great things, so people need, it's important to do the strengths. And not say, oh, well, we take for granted we've got these things well. But think about what are the strengths, articulate them, make sure there's a shared view, what we're good at. And then the weaknesses or challenges, to be frank and introspective about those. And that's very different from opportunities and threats. Opportunities are, we have this other department is doing this, we work well with them, we could collaborate, we can leverage what we have to do something even better, and how we focus on walking through those doors when they open. Threats are external. Threats are, the ACA is going to be repealed, and we don't know what's going in its place, but it's going to be, it's going to cost us a lot for taking care of our indigent care may not be covered. So that's external. The NIH won't be, you know, it'll be cut $4 billion next year. Nobody quote that or tweet that. God, I hope that doesn't happen. But those are kinds of anticipated external possibilities. Selecting strategic goals, I always say like 3 to 6, especially if it's a 5-year plan. If it's more than that, you're really not going to be able to address them all well. And one thing I find really helpful is getting that broad buy-in for things we want to work on, but also doing kind of a start, stop, continue exercise. What do we want to start doing today in this plan as we implement it that we're not doing now? We're not nurturing and feeding this aspect of our program, but if we could, it helps us get to our vision. That's something we want to start. The hard one is stop. What do we want to stop doing that we're doing now? And if that's supporting a program that doesn't have a future, that's a really hard discussion. but really important. And some people say strategic planning is deciding what you're not going to do. At least that's a piece of it. And then what you'll continue to do, and maybe continue with more focus and vigor once you've decided what you're not going to focus on going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark Mullins, who is professor of radiology, neurology, and every other department at Emory, and our wonderful vice chair for education.
You're funny. That's good. All right, you've been here. This is the intermission. Stand up, stretch, late in the day, day 3. Come on, I'm not kidding. Stand up. All right, it's part of your wellness. I'm here to help you. I'm your friend. I'm not from the government, but I am here to help you. All right, there you go. Good. Let's take a minute. It's good, good. Some people are, yeah, all right, some more people. That's good. Even in the chairs, stretching, that's good. Excellent. Good for you. All right. Nobody left when I did that. That's pretty good. All right. So I'm going to follow some very eminent speakers and precede some other eminent speakers. I'm going to talk to you about alignment of education for the strategic plan. So let's talk about that a little bit. Biggest thing, take-home point, right? I'll start with the end. Education needs to have a seat at the table. We need to be there. And I'm lucky enough to be in a place with a chair who walks the walk, talks the talk, and walks the walk with that. I've always had a seat at the table there as vice chair for education. If you're in a department that does not have a vice chair for education, I can't imagine why. Time is of the essence. So whatever role you have in your department right now, take it back and say, we really need one, all right? Because you need someone who is going to fly the education flag. Those 3 big missions for a big academic department: clinical practice, education, and research. You need somebody who's going to fly the education flag, who's going to make sure those things get done. If you have more than one program, which I bet most of you do, like if you have medical students and radiology residents, for example, you need somebody who's going to look out for the education mission. And that person needs to have a seat at the table, needs to be able to be around for decision-making, and strategic planning is a big decision-making move. You're trying to decide what the focus is going to be for your department, and in no small part, not only person power, but also how resources in terms of money are going to be allocated. All right, so that's very important. So you need to be aligned. You figure out what your mission and vision is. I'm not talking about necessarily what's on paper, but hopefully what's on, or electronic. Hopefully that's a reflection of what actually is going on and what you guys are and that kind of thing. We'll talk about the existential question in a minute. But you need to be aligned. So hopefully the education mission is important and then how it fits in. If it's not important, that is something that's going to take more than 15 minutes with me to figure out. That's going to be hard, and I'm glad to talk to you about that, but that's going to be a harder thing to deal with. All right, who are we and what do we want to be? I think this helps focus people into figuring out, what's going on currently and where do we want to go. And if that is a good way to open a segue to talk to your chair or whoever your dean or whoever you need to talk to get things going, I think that's a good place to go. Because in the modern world, I've seen the slippery slope go towards a lot less academia and a lot more of the bottom line. And I bet you know what I'm talking about. It's for some big academic places. And so, if we don't push back against that, where are we going to end up, right? So that's difficult. That's the existential question. Now, I make the argument that one of the core aspects of a department is going to be its educational mission. Now, I'm biased. I'm the vice chair for education. I'm flying the education flag. But still, let me make an argument for that. I know education costs money. I realize that. Clinical mission makes money. They say if you're successful in research, you only lose a little bit of money. And Carolyn will argue with me about that, I bet. And then the education mission straight up costs money, right? So I know that. So we have to take that kind of a resource allocation, that kind of investment. But it's a question of who are you and what do you want to be? I would say even for the places that are very focused on the clinical mission and perhaps on the research mission, being able to recruit the best and the brightest at all levels is going to depend a lot on your education programs. So that's very important. And that's where it sort of circles back. And obviously, if you ignore the education mission, you should not be surprised at what happens next. This is a version of Carolyn's point of like figuring out what to do once you figure out what's going on. Let me describe to you how we do the strategic planning at Emory, and hopefully you'll get some insight, and then when I can talk about this tool, which is from a great article from Richard Sharp and colleagues. So what we do is we get together a group of people for a retreat, and we have representation across our system from sites, from clinical research, education, all across the board. We have several program directors, all sorts of people in the room. Then we get together and we do some discussions, and then eventually people come up with ideas of things that they want to include in the next strategic plan. They write them down on Post-it notes, we put them on the wall, and then we start to put them together by thematic elements, and then start to develop them from there. It's a really cool process, and you're trying to see where most of the Post-it notes are and start to focus in those areas. And interestingly enough, there often are themes that come up, so it's very cool the way that kind of thing works out. Once you get into that, you have to develop it, and you certainly have to follow up on it, because obviously you don't follow up on it, then what use is it at that point? It's like Carolyn said, it's in the old days, just a bunch of meetings and doesn't go anywhere. Now, once you have an idea of like what you're working on, I think this pick chart is pretty good. This is something you're probably doing in your life right now, all of the time, whether you realize it or not. And you see this is on one axis, on the y-axis. So hopefully you can, people in the front can read it, so I'm sorry, I'll read it to you, right? So impact of goals on the y-axis, difficulty to implement on the x-axis, going from low to high, bless you. Now, which box is it that people are most of the time working on? Like any given day, what are the ones on your to-do list that you do? Possible, right? Low yield, low effort. Almost everybody, right? Anybody who's gone through medical school and got an internship, residency, you've got your to-do list and you are trying to check off boxes, right? We are wired that way, and if we are not wired that way, we get wired that way, right? Checking off those boxes and it carries over. That's super low, yeah, it's low-hanging fruit, but also it doesn't give you much, the fruit's not that much to begin with. We need to be working on things where, like the implement area, and working on, challenge and stuff like that, and certainly staying far away from the kill idea. So I think that this is useful when you think about it. I still like checking off boxes. It's still good. And here's the follow-up to Carolyn's slide earlier, talking about some of the things about how you do it. So this is the other three: implementation, metrics, and tracking. I think metrics are useful if they're interpreted. Don't just pick a number. Well, first of all, it's got to make sense, right? It's got to make sense. The metric has to be appropriate for what you're looking for. I'm getting some steps in, too, which I really appreciate. More of my wellness is working. So, you got to get, I think pick a metric which makes sense, and then figure out, what you're going to do with it. Don't just try to make it lower or higher just to make it lower or higher. You've got to figure out how to interpret it. For example, RVUs, right? Take somebody who's doing a lot of teaching in a section. Maybe the section runs very well, but maybe they only look at radiographs most of the time. So their RVUs are low. That needs to be interpreted. That needs to be factored in when you look at it. And then in tracking, of course, again, follow-up. That's very important in terms of what we do with the strategic plan. I thought this also from the Sharp article was very useful, just in terms of characterizing it. And I know a good way to lose 10% of you is to read to you, so I'm not going to read these. Hopefully the people in the back of the room can read it. It's not my fault. If you were in the front of the room, you could read it. But that's all right. If I was here, I'd be sitting in the back too, so it's good. All right, I'm going to summarize for you. So first of all is the purpose, like why you're there, right? You move on to identify whatever your strategic goals are. Then from there, you work on to strategic enablers, and then you got to follow up on it. You'll notice this is a circuit. It doesn't stop. It's continuous, like everything else in our life. Certification, licensure, you name it. This is another version. So one strategic plan goes into the next strategic plan. One of the people at our place, Ernie Garcia, talks about personal strategic planning. I think that's super useful as well. You should do it for yourself as well. I like the 1, 5, and 10-year rolling plans. Your goals, the things at the top of your list in terms of priority are going to change, and they should change over time. The 1-year stuff is stuff you ought to be, like, it should be in progress right now, like nearing completion. 5-year plan is stuff you need to start now so that it yields fruits soon. 10-year plan is where do you want to go? When do you do it? I suggest you do it before your year-end evaluation. And basically, that's similar to the 5-year plan Carolyn's talking about. About 5 years, things change so much, you need to come back about every 5 years to do the strategic plan. And for individuals, I like the 1, 5, and 10 years. Got to focus on people. It's kind of a cliche, but I think it's absolutely true. People, I think, hopefully, are your greatest resource. If people are not your greatest resource, I think that's a problem to begin with. Talent development is very, very important. We do a lot of faculty development at Emory. I think we do a really good job of it. Again, I could be biased about that, but I think it's something that the first step is to say, I want to do this. This is important. We're going to contribute to it because it's time, effort, and energy, and some of that equals money, right? So that is a commitment you've got to make. If you show people from top down that it's important, it will hopefully make a difference in terms of what's going to get done. Develop your bench strength. It's very important. So with the people we bring into this strategic planning process are not just the people at the top of every org chart. We bring in people who might be the next one up, like the sixth person, you know, in terms of the basketball analogy. The person off the bench, first person off the bench, that kind of thing. Because you never know, you might need that person right away, hopefully not. Hopefully you have time to develop them and give them opportunity. And then develop a system, develop them, and then get out of the way and let them move up, right? So those are important things. Develop bench strength. And, you know, a sign of a great place, inevitably, eventually, is that people take bigger and better jobs, sometimes in the same place, sometimes elsewhere. Leadership skill building. Do not pretend that leadership is going to happen just kind of spontaneously, or, you know, it does happen magically sometimes. And so, I mean, but you should focus on it. Develop people's leadership abilities. Have you ever noticed that somebody who becomes like the head MR tech is somebody who was a fantastic MR tech and not necessarily anybody who has any management skills or leadership skills or head CT tech or head nurse or those kind of things? It oftentimes is like that. They were fantastic at the actual process of doing what the technical aspects of their job, but not necessarily somebody who would, you know, maybe they'd be good, I hope they'd be good, let's see if they're good, you know, that kind of thing. But develop them. Develop everybody with leadership skills. That's something everybody needs at all levels, staff and faculty, that kind of thing. These are a bunch of, you know, some of these are adjectives and basically describes what we do, right? So it is a process. It is a continuous process. We are constantly doing it. There are ebbs and flows. Like I said, every 5 years we're focusing on it, but, you know, we are basically continuously doing it. We're coming back. When, you know, basically one of the things, we have a session yearly where Carolyn will do a state of the department, and we'll get up and show where we are relative to our strategic plan in the last year. Another thing is when we have an initiative in the department, she will align it and attach it and say these are the things we're focusing on and doing because these were some of the things we decided were important. It's got to be ongoing, it's got to be deliberate, and it is a big opportunity. And we've already talked about how the alignment's very important. I'm going to finish up with this. Culture is super important. If you have a bad culture, very hard to change. But if your culture is good, you're in a great situation. In between, try to nudge it in the right direction. Should be a collaboration, should not be siloed. Education needs to be there, needs to have a seat at the table, needs to be included. Budgeting, you know, this is important. Like, you know, I talk to some program directors who have never seen a budget ever. So that is a problem as far as I'm concerned. It's a dedicated process. Do not assume that this is going to fall into the cracks of, you know, nights, weekends, and holidays or what's left over time. Focus on it. It should be structured, but as Carolyn said, it should be flexible, and then you got to follow up on it to make sure it works. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next session is on financial management, and that'll be Satoshi, Minoshima, and Marta, Heilbrun. Let me just, do you have separate ones, presentations? Okay,
We do.
all right.
Well, thank you. And well, thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me and Marta to talk about the financial management for the radiology residency program. And compared to the prior two talks, you know, talking about social media, that's really exciting with George Clooney's picture. Strategic development is also really exciting, but finance, well, we have to do this well, really, to achieve our mission and the vision. And just to show you one data, this is a WAMC, and just looking at the year-to-year change in the number of residency spots in the entire health system compared to radiology. And just to make it clear, radiology is actually magnified 10 times. So we don't have that amount of red bar, that's a radiology residency number, as compared to blue bar is a total residency spots in the United States. As you can see that residency spots is increasing slowly, also GME trying to put a lot of cap. But the residency in radiology, if you take a look at the red bar, looks like we are struggling a little bit. So even though we think that radiology is such an exciting field, but for the medical students, you know, year to year up and down, if you remember 2015, you know, we couldn't really fill the spot, you know, that bad, but we slowly came back. We had a discussion this morning, like looking at the radiology volume just nationwide. The volume of the radiology practice is still increasing, at least, you know, slowly or actually rapidly. So we need to educate future radiologists really to bring a value to the health system as a field of radiology. So education becomes very, very important mission of our programs. And of course, to support that, this is something we have to remember. There is no margin, no mission. To achieve education mission, we have to carefully think about how we're going to fund it and how we're going to create the margin within the health system. Majority of the residency program is really funded through the clinical services and the revenue. And if you think about where does clinical revenue come from? And it's kind of an interesting realization that there are three sources. So one is taxpayers, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And the other one is employers, so they pay for the health system for their employees. And the other one is patient, so co-pay, out of pocket, or they exchange and they just buy health plans. So if you think about those funds supporting residency program really comes from those three entities. So we have to align how we're going to educate our resident aligned with some of those funding sources, which is really clinical service and the clinical experience. And just looking into a little more line items within, let's say, government taxpayers supporting a residency program, I think program director knows about those things. So there is a DME, or the Direct Graduate Medical Education Fund, and the Indirect Medical Education Fund, which is for the hospital with an inpatient, more advanced, care. And the Medicaid GME, also this is kind of a decreasing, funded by state. This is another opportunity, and the VA. And the VA actually is very enthusiastic supporting residency program. I think this is true at many institutions. And the other interesting fund source, if you think about, and this is really depends on the institution, but so hospital clinic, radiology challenge, huge technical, limited professional, and typically in many institutions there is a funds flow or transfer from a technical side to professional side. So this money can be pooled within the department, spent for the missions, such as including an educational mission. So this radiology residency support, finance management, it's a little variable from institution to institution. Some institutions just stick to the GME dollar. Some institutions try to pool some of those department funds to support mission. But it's really a part of the very important strategy. And just to visualizing this, I think it's always seeing is easier to understand. So clinical revenue, and depends on the payer mix, goes to the teaching, hospital, and clinic as a technical revenue. Some of them are earmarked for GME. Some transfer directly to the department, and the professional, which doesn't really make huge amount of margin, all pooled in the radiology. And one of the important chair's mission or the role is to distribute those pooled funds based on the missions we have to accomplish. Education is clearly one of those missions within the radiology department. But because this resident, is really tied to the clinical revenue and workforce, we have to carefully think about what kind of a personnel workforce would you like to have in your department. And just in general, we have attending physicians. APC is an advanced practice clinician, such as nurse practitioner. They can be semi-independent, depends on the states, and the fellow and the resident. So if you take a look at the service independency, of course, attending has to be capable independently to provide medical care. Resident, they need a lot of supervision. So the second one, requirement for supervision can be replaced by educational requirement. So resident has a huge educational requirement. But if you actually take a look at the cost, attending, more expensive, and the resident, less expensive. So adjusting your volume of residency spots, fellow spots, and attending spots, and the APC spots, it's really the balancing those three columns and see what the appropriate allocation to really achieve the mission most effectively. I think that becomes a very, very important strategic goal. So how about the expense? So we understand where the money comes from, but how are we using this? And I just listed some of those. I think these are pretty common across program, and Marta is going to talk about more in details how those monies used to support residency program. But one of the important things that we have to realize, and the previous speaker just touched on this, is that the training for the residency is not just the clinical service or service skills. I think there are many more things we like to train, regardless if they're going to stay in academia or go to a private clinic. We like to give them some research skills, or the scholarship skills, even leadership skills we like to provide, or maybe business finance skills and all of those things. So how are we going to support those activities within the residency program? So that becomes interesting innovation opportunities. Because as I said, clinical revenue support the majority of the fund for the residency program, but there are many other opportunities if you actually think about, such as grants and contract, which is provided by, let's say, RSMA for resident research training. So you can align this opportunity well to accomplish non-clinical training opportunities within the residency program. How about the industrial collaboration? So industry sometimes, and we have those experience, they like to fund to support trainees. So if we can capture those opportunities, a great way to support resident, engaging into non-clinical service-related training. Well, actually, philanthropic fund is really a great opportunity. You can get a big endowment to support the education or small program support to really kind of enhance residency experience in non-clinical domains. So capturing those opportunities to really enable residency program is a very important strategy for the chairs. So just summarizing this brief discussion, it's a finance for the residency program. Really aligning missions and funds for clinical revenue is still a major service revenue source. So we have to think about how we're going to integrate that notion. Workforce optimization is also very important. I think Alex was by email just joking about program. Director likes to have more residency and the chair has a limited funds. That's true. So how are we going to optimize, not just thinking about residency, but attending APC fellow and the residency spots. Non-clinical education is very, very important. And if we capture opportunities really to help those non-clinical education, I think that would be really ideal. Thank you. And so Marta is going to talk about more program side of the view of this funds fund.
Thank you very much. So in my portion of it, I'm going to actually get into some of the details because as Satoshi described to us, no margin, no mission. And if we don't know what it is that our residents are actually doing and what we're getting for them, then it's very difficult to figure out how we create the room to do other things and to do other activities. So at the end of this session, I hope that you actually have a better understanding of how much it actually costs to train a resident. And to also have some tools to think about what is it that we're getting for that investment. Because remember, we're investing in these people in our departments. That's what we're doing. So again, as background, and many of the program directors are probably very aware of this, and certainly the chairs are as well, the IOM report of the graduate medical education that meets the nation's healthcare needs basically said that we spend money on resident education throughout the entire country, and we have no idea what we get for it. There is no accountability on the hospital side for what we actually get from that training. And if this is public and taxpayer money that we're spending on this activity, we should have some accountability. The taxpayers should have some accountability for it. And so their argument is that if we don't figure out the accountability, then in fact this source of funding may have to change. So one of the things that we have spent a lot of time doing at the University of Utah is really looking into how much it costs to do things. What is the sources of income, and can we measure it? And once we start to measure it, once we start to shed light on the things that we spend money on, then we can again make some changes and decide the value of those changes. So we have to actually figure out how much it costs. And we must clearly articulate what we get when we do that training. And then we have to explore the alternatives. So let's define the job. Sort of step back and say, well, what is actually the job of faculty in a radiology department or in any clinical department? In academics, it's clinical care, it's education, it's scholarly activity, and it's service and administration. Well, let's talk about what the activity and the job of a resident is. The reality is that a resident does clinical care, education, scholarly activity, and service and administration. So we're really very aligned in the activities that our trainees do and our faculty do. The distributions may be different, but what we actually are doing is very similar. So let's change the way we talk about that. And again, this has been alluded to in some of the strategic planning aspects as well, is what is the income generating things that we do and what are the non-income generating things that we do? Clinical care, we know, is income generating. Now, the reality is that medical student education is in some ways income generating because there is tuition. Scholarly activity may or may not be income generating, and especially if it's funded research, then it is income generating in theory. Service and administration that we all spend a tremendous amount of time doing is probably not an income generating activity. The education of trainees is going to be a cost center because we're paying the salaries for these people. Their scholarly activity, if it's unfunded, if it's QI, if it's informatics, any of those kinds of things may not be income generating. So let's focus, again, I'm just going to sort of narrow in on two aspects of what we're doing for this talk, the clinical care income generating activity, and then the education of trainees, the non-income generating side of things, in theory. So we, again, took back and spent some time looking at not just our ACGME-based salaries, but really what is the investment that we have in the GME office that supports our residents. And so this number of $74,000 a year is an average of all PGY years, and this is really looking at what it costs, both the money that we bring in and the operating costs of the GME office and the university. But we have a couple of other things that we need to factor into what the salary is, what the annual cost is. So the associated costs, again, this has been discussed before, these include things like our resident travel, our resident office supplies, printing, dues, meals for activities, a number of different things that we do that are related to that thing, and we allocate that on a per resident cost. So what we came up with that, looking at our annual expenditures, is that this is about $4,000 per resident per year. So not a huge amount of money, but again, increases that base cost. So then the other part of it that we really spend a lot of time thinking about and delving into is the opportunity costs related to having trainees in the system. And these are the things that are directly related to resident training and that are not income generating. So if we think about it, the salary support that goes to the program director's time for administering the program is not an income generating activity. So we have to allocate that portion of the time to this. Our associate PD, we have to allocate the time we give to that. Our program coordinator that we have, that is a salary that we are paying 100% to support the residency mission. And then we have all of the faculty time that we spend in resident recruitment. The time that our faculty are spending reviewing applications, that they are actually interviewing all of the applicants. I mean, this is time that we need to include in understanding what our faculty are doing and how we are investing. And this is time that our faculty are not doing income generating activities, they're not doing clinical care, they're not writing papers, they're not doing all these other things. So this is a real investment that we're making in this activity. And other things, this is the way we looked at what we're doing. So a faculty teaching, again, these are all non-income generating activities. This is time that faculty are spending doing things that support the residency program. And we had an estimate of 200 hours per year of didactic lectures. We have 250 hours of other activities that our faculty perform related to our noon conferences and our review courses that we derive, where physics courses. This is a number of things that we do. And for each one of these hours, we built into this calculation the added time for preparation. And then we also we actually still do oral examinations for our resident programs, and so that's quite a bit of faculty time. And scholarly activity supervision. So when we looked at all of these opportunity costs, we said that we're coming up with about $21,000 per resident per year. So that's quite a bit. So if we look at our actual annual cost to the department trainee, it's $100,000 per year. That's how much it costs to train someone. So that's a place to start. That's a place to know something about. So then, let's look at what we actually get for that investment. What does a trainee even do during their day? I don't know. Maybe they show up, maybe they go skiing. They could do lots of different things. And then what is the actual impact on faculty, clinical, and income generating things? So we did a couple of different surveys to look at this process, and we said, how much time is a resident there? When did they clock in the morning, and when did they clock out? And we did this both with a survey that we had the residents doing on service for 2 weeks, and then we also did some validations using our duty hours reporting. So our residents spend about 10 hours a day, and this is not including their overnight time. And the readout time, so the time that they are spent with a resident reviewing studies, is a little over an hour. And that range, because our first, for first year residents, we spend more time, and for senior residents, we tend to spend less time in this. But so a resident actually spends about 12% of their day doing this kind of readout activity. And then the education, again, all of these conferences that are happening, that's 25% of the day that a resident spends is in education. So we're getting clinical work out of them, but we're also delivering quite a bit of education to our residents during the day. So let's think about what the clinical workflow is. So again, during that day, the activities that are happening and what's the impact on the clinical care, because this is what else we're doing. And we have our workflow. This is, so our technologist completes a examination. A resident has the first go at it, generates a draft report, looks at it. Then the trainee and the faculty, they sit down and they have that 1.5 hours a day of time reviewing the studies. The trainee then converts their report into a preliminary report. The faculty then spends another bit of time reviewing that preliminary report and signing it off. And so that's the process from complete to final that happens. So there's going to be an impact related to having a trainee involved in this process. So when we looked at our hours, so the complete to final, and that's the whole process, wrapping it all together. Residents, there's actually not a whole lot of variation in the amount of time that we get to that process when you have residents or fellows involved. It's, the complete to final in our institution, it's, somewhere around 7 to 8 hours is what our average time for getting that done is. But if it's an attending alone, where we skip that preliminary and that review process, our complete to final time is around 3 hours. So the reality is that when we have residents involved in the process, our complete to final turnaround time is going to slow down because, of course, an attending gets the report, reviews it, and creates a final right there. We don't have any of this pause and reintroduce it. And then the other thing, of course, that you can see is that the volume that we have doing the reports, you can tell that there's a lot of studies that we have that attendings are doing without residents involved. So that is influencing what we're doing with our residents. So let's look at something more importantly, because while the final is the part of the report that's generated for billing, there's the action part of when is the information available in the medical system for taking care of our patients. And that's another really important thing to look at. So if you look at that complete to prelim, and again, this is in the daytime service where the prelims do not happen until an attending has reviewed with the resident, you see that we're now getting these reports out in much more of the 2-hour range. And I think it is a little interesting that it's longer in our fellows, and it's probably just because we have our fellows doing a lot of other things that interrupts their workflow in ways that we don't necessarily have our residents doing. So if we take our mean complete to prelim time, which again is in this 2 to 3 hour range, and we compare our complete to prelim and our complete to final for our attendings, now we actually see that we really are in the same range. So we are, by having residents involved in our training process and the turnaround and the supervision by attendings, we're getting information available to our providers at a relatively fast time. We may not be getting the information into our billing system at the same time, but we're certainly getting actionable information available to our providers. So what are alternatives to this? If we really want to turn around the billing thing, we could certainly hire more faculty. That's an option. But who here is not trying to hire faculty? Who here is trying to hire faculty? I mean, everybody's trying to hire faculty. So we need to keep the trainees in the program, and we need to keep this pipeline open because we're going to need them, and faculty are, of course, going to be much more than $100,000 a year. So this is a relatively good investment. We could hire mid-level providers, and that will solve some of our problems, but the reality is that if we want our mid-level providers to help us with this getting information available to our patients and to our providers in a timely manner, we are still going to have to make that faculty investment in their education. We can't skip that step. That will be a step that will lose our value if we don't have mid-level providers in this way. And we could also invest and develop the technology that will allow us, I mean, this is some of the talks about AI, is that it will be like a super resident. You're always delivered a report that is pre-filled with information. But again, even that is going to require a substantial investment to get to this place, and it won't necessarily fix our pipeline issue. So, in summary, the reality is that it costs money to train our future workforce. It's the bottom line. It does, and it's an investment that I think is worth doing. And if we really look at what we get out of it, we actually are able to provide timely overall patient care because of having trainees in our system. And that's the reason why it's important in investment, one of the reasons. And there are alternatives, and we should all spend time exploring those alternatives, but they are not necessarily going to be without opportunity costs on our current productivity. So thank you very much.
I would like to thank all of our speakers. This concludes the presentation portion of our session, and now we can open it up to Q&A. And our speakers, do you all want to be in the front there, or do you want to come sit up here? Why don't you I'll give up my seat, and you guys can sit down, because I've been sitting up here by myself for a while. I want to share the stage for sure. So questions? Good job. So they did such a great job that we have. So do you have any questions for each other from our speakers to kind of kick this off?
I have a question from Marta. Great talk. And so if we look at this is the Association of University Radiologists and the SCARD meeting. If we look at academic radiology programs, we're creating our future through our trainees. That is always a competitive advantage over our community practice. I mean, so I guess is the opposite possible? Might community practices view trainees as their future and want to, strictly from a competitive advantage standpoint, recognize that they also need to participate in training?
And I know that that's been explored a number of times. Is there a way, I mean, and we, of course, are training most of the physicians that fill all the private hospitals that feed into our place. So that is, and I think that's one of the ways to look at the IOM report. Is it that the private side of medicine needs to have a shared investment in this? Is it really solely a taxpayer investment? I think that's a good question. I don't know how you get that partnership and how you get that buy-in, but I think, Satoshi, you've been exploring different ways that we can get investment from the private side. Any successes?
Well, in many ways, I think thanks to all the reform and other things, the difference in finance, between academic institutions and mid-sized, large private operations, I think it's kind of a margin. And it really comes back to the mission of, each operation. So why we call ourselves academic is really because we have this huge educational mission we have to stick to. Does that mean that private group doesn't have educational skills and opportunities? The answer is they do have those opportunities and skills. But just for the private, clinic depends on their institutional mission. Sometimes the education is not part of it. So I think there is an opportunity. That's what Marta is kind of indicating, that if some practice group has a unique, let's say, patient mix, which we may not have at the university setting or VA setting, why not collaborate and really enhance educational opportunity? I think that's certainly a part of the important strategy.
Are there questions from the audience? Okay, I'm going to ask, we can either hand you the microphone here. Okay, sorry.
I have two questions.
We'll go to the microphone next. Okay.
One is for Mark, and the other one is for Satoshi.
Could you?
So for Mark,
Yes.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
the question is, how do you teach the residents about strategy and strategic planning? And if you're not doing it currently, how would you ideally want to do it?
Yeah.
The question for Satoshi and Marta is that a lot of institutions are receiving pressure to decrease their number of fellowship positions for a variety of reasons. What can we use to push back on that specifically in terms of cost justification? And on that question, we could all panelists. Carolyn may have an answer.
Could everyone hear the questions? Or should we repeat them? Well, let's go ahead and, so Mark, your question was, how do you teach about strategic planning to your residents?
Yeah, so we have a healthcare economics curriculum that we do, and it is one of many topics that we include. I will say it's not emphasized, and the other thing is that they don't really have a workshop version of it. In terms of when we get together, I did think that the last time we do it, I did think it was, I didn't realize at the time I should have included the chief residents in the process. I should have invited them. I felt bad afterwards that I didn't do it. So next time we do it, which is very soon, I definitely want to get them there. And I'm sure you all have encountered our chief residents here. They're very active, and I want to get them going, and they're probably, your future, that you should be looking out for them. They're fantastic. So we do it in a technical way, and we talk about it, and we give them some skills. We talked about some tools, some things like that, and it's throughout the process of the healthcare economics thing. For those of you who run programs know that it's part of the milestones and you have to assess them, and so we've been partially motivated by that, but partially motivated by the thought we think it's very important. And then, of course, it isn't lost on us that we have Rich Dusak at our place who can take care of this with aplomb. So, that is how we do it. Could we do a better job of it? I like this has definitely stirred up more thoughts about it. In fact, I really like the data part. We do a retreat for our fellows, including some healthcare economics, amongst other things. But one of the things that we traditionally do with our fellow retreats is show them how to read spreadsheets, which many radiologists at that point cannot do. And one of the ways in which our department was very transparent is that when I first saw our administrators come and work with our fellows, they were using actual numbers from our department. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. And so this is actually something, like my creative juices are going, so I appreciate the question. Like, I want to get them doing some practical things and try to do something in some application, getting some data. I think that would be cool. So thank you.
And the next question was for Marta, and I think it had to do with pressure reduction of fellows, right?
Well, I was going to defer to Satoshi because he's actually been the one who's been really pushing and encouraging us to bring in more fellows. And that's actually one of the things as a program director, that push for more fellows is a bit of a tension for do I want, because if we don't have the fellows, that again creates bandwidth for the residents to take on more responsibility. And part of what I want to push into them is that idea that during the course of their training, they are transitioning from the student to the practitioner. And if we have a lot of fellows in place, they don't get to do those things. They don't have to take on the responsibility as they get further along in their residency that they do if there is not a fellow present. So for a program director, it's actually a tension. And it's certainly something that most applicants will ask, well, how many fellows do you have? Is your program a fellow-driven program, or is it a resident-driven program? So we have to be very careful about that. So I think that's really more a balanced question for the chairs.
And to that balance question, I think the issue is nationally, so would he be training more radiologists overall?
I feel like we have to, train, just looking at the data, and I think it's a good thing if you think about more people using imaging as a part of their, patient care, because I think it really tells the value of imaging, right? But it's just the GME funding, cap, all of those things. It's hard to grow residency program just simply based on the strategy. So we have to manage finance side to really empower residency program. But if you actually take a look at the national trend, so let's say IR is a great example now. They're independent, but also they have a RE specialization. So basically third year, fourth year, they're going to specialize be IR as a subspecialty already. So there is some trend. We have to train general radiology still because it's a very, very important part of the patient care. But then for this specialized group of people, basically the year is getting earlier and earlier. And some programs start combining fourth year because thanks to core exam actually moves to third year. So emphasis on the subspecialty training is already there. So how are you going to finance it? I think that's a big question to chair. And maybe one thing we can just mention, so where does the money comes from and the clinical revenue? And if you think about technical, part of Medicare payment through the GME office is limited. So if you're going to really grow fellowship program, you really have to think about where this money comes from, which is typically hospital transfer to the department. But it's really, in my mind, it's really so a little kind of a complicated. Why we have to go 2 steps instead of 1 step? So at the University of Utah, for the first time, I don't know if there was a small article in the radiology business, we just combine technical and professional. And there will be a operation by joint Deitte leadership, radiology chair and hospital CEO. Then by creating this funds flow, it's actually pretty much up to us where to put the appropriate trainees, opportunities, and workforce, because we have to care for the patient. That's really the revenue of the training program back. So I think the chair's role is really to acknowledge value of fellowship versus residency, and how to come up with an innovative fund flow to really support those missions.
Okay, thank you. And I think we had another question from the audience.
Hello, Tudor Hughes from UC San Diego. And like my chairman, my question is really about the balance of residents and fellows, but more from a value point of view. And I wanted to ask Marta, had you considered the value of the fellows with a point of the time you put into interviewing them, the fact they're only with you for 1 year, occasionally 2 years, their loyalty to the program is not so much to the fellowship as to the residency. And so, yes, they're slightly more efficient, they can do a few more things, but where do you find that actual value balance between fellows and residents?
So I'm still actually on, I mean, again, I looked at the numbers of, the work. Over and over again, as a program director, my job is to be a champion for the residents and the residency program, and think that's more important than having fellows around. I mean, that's what I do, and I advocate for them. I think really, and again, it comes into that issue of the loyalty. Are the residents loyal to, are they more loyal to the program? Are they going to provide more feedback, or are fellows going to provide more feedback? And what is the impact on the work that we have them do? The ability to get independent work out of fellows certainly creates bandwidth for faculty to be able to teach the residents. And so that's something that is an important measure in there. Using our fellows also to have surrogate teaching roles is an important way of increasing the loyalty to the institutional department, because I watch our fellows as they grow during their year and spend more and more time teaching and realizing that they're having an impact on the residents. Their loyalty to the program and their investment in the actual program starts to grow. So I think it is a balance. But my purpose and my job, 100% in this role, is to be the bulldog for the residents, and that's where our investment needs to be. And our investment in fellows is only in so much as it supports the faculty to be able to focus on residents.
Okay, are there other questions? Yes.
I promise, no more questions. But the last one, about social media. Do you teach your residents how to use it to grow their practices once they come out? And do you also connect that to marketing education? And if so, could you tell us a little bit about how you do marketing education for your residents and how they learn about the nuts and bolts business of radiology?
Could you repeat? Would you be able to? So it was like a 2-part question, I believe.
So if I understand the question, the first part was, do we teach them how to use social media to market their practice when they're out? And then how do we teach them marketing and business in general? So I'll answer the second part first, because we actually have a separate series. Every month it's called ABP, the Art, Business, and Practice of Radiology. And that's a course where we bring in people generally from outside the department who have expertise in different things. And we don't really have a curriculum line that says marketing per se, but that's where that would fall. And that's where we try to teach them the business things. But generally we bring non-radiologists who, whatever their specialty is, we bring in lawyers or coding people and that kind of thing. I will say, not that we specifically talk about marketing that I can recall recently. Social media, we use it more right now. We've really been teaching them more about marketing themselves. We have it out there, they understand that patients are a potential audience. We have not really been teaching them to target them. The institution sees that. It has some accounts that it targets to patients. We've not been doing that, but I think that's where this will go eventually. I just think we're not quite there yet. We don't know exactly how to teach them to do that yet.
Okay, well, I think it's probably time for us to wrap it up, so I'd like to thank all of our speakers, and I'd like to thank you for your attention.